The 2mm cording that I will be using for this has been discontinued. However, you can use any 2mm cording that you would like, and I will put a link in the description box for a really good alternative that actually has a lot more colors. And I will also be using a 4.5mm crochet hook. And my base is about a 7" by 2". If you use a different size base, you may need to adjust your foundation row. And to begin, I'm going to cast on with a little bit of a tail onto the base. Make sure your pegs are facing you if your bottom has pegs on it. Sometimes the holes are not all the way punched out. And before we do the foundation round, I'm going to put a slip stitch in every hole around the base. When you get to your last hole, use your tail to close that round. And now we're ready for our foundation round. The reason I chose to do this basket weave with 4 stitches wide instead of 3, like the traditional basket weave, is because the number of holes that I have in this base did not make it a number that was divisible by 6. And so I counted up the numbers and I said, well, it's a multiple of 8, so I can just do my pattern in 4s instead of 3s. So that's the reason behind this. So your foundation round needs to be a multiple of 8 if you're using this basket bottom. So I'm going to start at the peg where an increase stitch goes. You can start anywhere on the bottom that you want. This is just where I'm choosing to start. And then I'm going to put increased stitches from peg to peg, and then I'm going to do a single crochet. And then an increase. And then a single crochet. And an increase. a single crochet. And the next 2 holes will be increase. And then back to single crochet. And then we're going to alternate again, single crochet, increase until we get to the peg. And then when you get to the peg, do increases in your curve. And now we're going to go back to doing single crochet and increase, alternating. And we're going to do this side the same way we did the other side. When we get to the end of the round, we're going to close the round. And this will be our foundation. And round 1 is going to be in the back loop only. So insert your hook in that back loop. And then we're also going to go into the back bump. And this is just to make sure that there's not a gap at the base of the purse. So when you pull your working yarn through, do a chain 1. And then in the back loop only and in the back bump, do a single crochet in every stitch. At the end of round 1, close the round. And we're done working in the back loop. We're now going to use both loops. So when you start this next row, insert your hook with both loops. Pull your working yarn through and chain 2. And we're going to put a double crochet in every stitch for round 2. At the end of round 2, we're going to close our round. Make sure you're going into the first loop and not the 2 chains that you did to start the row. For round 3, chain 2. This chain 2 is going to be part of a seam that is going to be in the back of the purse. This is a 4-stitch by 4-stitch pattern, and the chain 2 is not going to be part of that 4-stitch pattern. So you can see here that there is a seam in the back. I don't believe it's very noticeable because of the type of pattern it is. I think it's hidden pretty well, but just be aware that right there where that seam is, you do have 4 front post stitches and you have a seam. So the chain 2 is not one of your stitches. So for round 3, we're going to put a front post double crochet in the first 4 stitches. So right around those double crochets that you just did will be front post double crochets in 4. And then you will do back post double crochets in the next 4. You can put a stitch marker right there at the first stitch, which would probably be helpful. So now we're doing the 4 back post double crochets. And then repeat that pattern. So the next 4 will be front post, and then you'll go back to doing back post, and you just keep repeating 4 front post and 4 back post till you get to the end of the row. And your last 4 are going to be back post because you want your back post to be next to your front post. So since you started with the front post, you're going to end with back post stitches. This is a 8-stitch pattern repeat. And the last 4 stitches here are back post. And then we're going to close the round. Make sure that you're not getting those chain 2 stitches. So putting a stitch marker in the first stitch of these post stitches would be helpful, because when you do the post stitches, it does kind of pull the row over a little bit. So if you have a hard time being able to tell where the first stitch is, then use stitch markers. And round 4 is going to be a repeat of round 3. And this is where it's different than the basket weave pattern in rows. In rounds, you do 2 of the same rows at a time, and that is how it makes the basket weave pattern. So you're chain 2 and then front post double crochets in the first 4. I'm going to go ahead and put the stitch marker in that first stitch. And then 4 back post double crochet. And then repeat that pattern of 4 front post and 4 back post until you get to the end. And again, like before, your last 4 will be back post. That's the end of round 4. Close the round. And now that we have 2 rows of our stitches, we're going to alternate by starting with back post and then do front post, and that's what gives it that basket weave look. So for round 5, chain 2. So where we have front post, we're now going to have back post. Chain 2. And the first 4 stitches will be back post stitches. Make sure you're not going around that chain 2. That chain 2 is going to stay there as a seam. So back post stitches in the first 4. and then we're going to do front post stitches in the next 4. And then repeat that pattern. Back post in 4, front post in 4 until you get to the end of the round, and the last 4 will be front post. And we're at the end of round 5, and we're doing the front post stitches to end the round. And then close the round. For round 6, chain 2 and repeat round 5. Back post in 4. And then front post in 4. And repeat that pattern. Your last 4 will be front post. That is the end of round 6. For the rest of the project, you will repeat rows 3 through 6 until you get your purse the height that you want. So rows 3 and 4 start with front post. Rows 5 and 6 start with back post. And that is how you get the basket weave look. Remember to chain 2 at the beginning of every row, and don't put a back post or front post around the chain 2. So now I have my bag about the height I want. I added a tag, and I will put a link in the description box for a video I did on how to do that. Also, I will put a video link for adding D-rings. I am at about 8 inches wide, about 7.5 inches tall. Once you get the bag as tall as you want, cut your yarn, and we're going to close that round and tie it off in a knot, and then we're going to add a flap, and the flap is going to go from side to side. You just don't want the flap to go all the way into the crease. You want it to go just to the edge of the back so that it will flip over your purse and not be in that crease. To do the basket weave flap, we're going to go in rows. So we're going to be turning our work. So now we're basically just going to be going back to the original basket weave pattern that is in my tutorial, and I will have that in the description box, the link to that video. So we couldn't do it that way in the rounds because the pattern wouldn't work out. But when you do the flap, you're not going in rounds. So you can just go back and do the basket weave pattern as it originally is. So you need to mark, we're going to weave in that tail when we do the flap. But you need to figure out where your flap is going to go. So you need to take stitch markers and put it in the stitch on each side where the flap is going to start and end, so you know where you are crocheting to when you are going back and forth in your rows. It's hard to give exact instructions on the flap because it could be different depending on which hole you started your base in and if your bottom is a different size than mine. You need to do back post and front post double crochets that make your flap line up with the pattern in your purse body, keeping in mind that because you are turning your work, you need to make sure that you are doing the post stitch that will give you 2 rows for each block. And we're going to begin every row with a chain 2. I'm only going to do 3 post stitches to begin with because the one of the post stitches is in the curve and I don't want my flap to be in that curve of the purse. So start with a chain 2 and then do whatever post stitch matches up for where you are in your body. So because I ended my purse with the main body of the purse with a row 6, I have the 2 rows that make that block 2 rows tall. So because that is a front post stitch, I will start with back post stitches. So I'm doing the 3 back post double crochet, and then I will do 4 front post double crochet. So you just follow whatever pattern you already have there. So depending on where the corner of your back is, you may have to do 2, you may have 4, you may only have 1. But just follow what's already there. And then just keep doing your repeat pattern of back post and front post till you get to the end of the row, which is going to be the edge of the purse on the back side. And putting a stitch marker where you're going to stop is going to be helpful. I just didn't do it. So crochet all the way to the end. And when you get to the end, your last stitch should be a double crochet. It's not a front post or back post. It's just a regular double crochet. And depending on where the last stitch in your row is, you may or may not be completing a 4-stitch pattern. So if your last stitches are front post, you may not be able to do all 4. You just go to where the edge of the back is, and then chain 2, turn, So because my last stitches in that row were front post, I now will begin with back post stitches. And make sure that you're not putting a back post around that chain 2. The chain 2 just stays there. It does not get a back post or a front post. And then just repeat your pattern, whether you're starting with back post or front post, all the way across till you get to the end of the row. After you finish the last post stitch, put a double crochet in the chain 2 space. Chain 2, turn your work. And to keep our pattern going, we're now going to need to do front post stitches. Make sure you're not putting a post stitch around that chain 2. And now I need to do back post stitches. And when you get to the end of the row, make sure that you put a double crochet in the chain 2 space. Now I'm going to do front post stitches. And go to the end of the row, repeating your pattern. And then you just keep repeating your pattern until your flap is the size that you want it to be. The clasp that I wanted to use requires a hole in the middle for the lock to go through, and it doesn't fit very well on the bulky post stitches, so I ended the flap with rows of single crochet. I marked where the hole needed to be, and then I stopped, turned, and went back and forth for 2 rows, and then I did 6 chains across the top to get back to the other side, and then I did 2 single crochets in those last of the 6 chains, and then dropped back down to my row and went and did rows back and forth. so you can see where that hole needs to be. So now I'm just going to weave in my tail and attach my clasp. And here's a couple of other ones I did doing the clasp a different way.